Good evening, everyone, and welcome. My name is Brittany Park, the Research Coordinator of H2 Network America, and I'm grateful you're joining us for part one of our clinical trials series, Clinical Trials 101. Tonight's session is focused on the basics of clinical trials. What is clinical research? What are clinical trials? And what the phases of a clinical trial mean. Before we begin, we'd like to recognize our sponsor for making this series possible. Thank you to Travere Therapeutics for supporting this webinar series and helping us expand clinical trial education for our community. We're also joined this evening by Danae Barkey, Executive Director of H2 Network America. She will be facilitating the live Q&A and share her experience as a patient. Tonight, we're grateful to hear from Danae, the Executive Director, and also a patient living with classical HCU. Danae and her family are from Batavia, Illinois, and she was diagnosed with classical homocystinuria in 1995 at the age of 10. After Garrett, her younger brother, had a lens dislocation. Since then, their family has learned what it takes to manage HCU every day and why clinical trial education matters for advancing research and therapies for the homocysteinurias. Please join me in welcoming Danae, and she'll take a few minutes to speak.
Hi, everyone. Um, as Brittany introduced me, my name is Danae Barkey. In 1995, I was 10 years old, and finding information was really hard. We had just received our diagnosis. Given the internet was in its infancy stages, you really wouldn't find a whole lot. You might find something like a paragraph in a textbook. So really, overall, we just had to trust our doctors. When Garrett and I were diagnosed, they didn't give us a very encouraging outlook. The two things that really stood out at that time was they told us the life expectancy of a patient with classical homocystinuria was 30 years old, and having children of my own would be far too dangerous. Not things that you really want to tell a 10-year-old. Don't encourage that. And this really came out of a landmark study that was published in 1985 by the late Harvey Mudd, and it was soul crushing. I wanted to have a big family. My grandparents lived well into their 90s, their parents did. And so the idea of only living to 30 and not being able to have my own big family also was devastating. But fast forward to 2026, and here we are. I'm a decade past that 30-year mark, and I have a 7-year-old daughter, proving that with current treatments, patients are doing better, living longer, and even having their own families. But here has what hasn't changed. The last FDA-approved drug for any of the homocystinuria was came to market in 1996. That was the year after Garrett and I were diagnosed. So really nothing has changed. Our understanding of homocystinuria really hasn't evolved because there hasn't really been any published natural history studies, which we'll learn a little bit about what that means. And there has been no treatments. We are on a new horizon, though, and there are new therapies in development, new treatments, and we really need to take action as a community if we want to see better. If we want to know that for classical homocystinuria, low protein diet and formula are not going to hopefully be the opportunity forever. And so it's been exciting to see where things are going. And I tell patients frequently that, when we got our diagnosis, the idea of a cure was somewhat of a fairy tale. You could conceptualize it, but there was just there was never an opportunity for that to be real. But now in 2026, there are gene therapies for other disease states where people are having cures. So we are in a different time, but that means also taking action and being the driver in what is to come for our community. So I hope that you guys will enjoy tonight's presentation from Sagar, who Brittany will introduce shortly, and that you will join me in taking action and helping drive understanding and new therapies forward.
Thank you so much, Danae, for sharing your family's story and reminding us why clinical trial education is so important. Not just in theory, but in real life, for families managing rare diseases every day. Now it's my privilege to introduce our main speaker, Dr. Sagar Vaidya. I hope I'm saying that correctly. Dr. Vaidya is a doctor, scientist, and biotech executive with over 20 years of experience across academia and the pharmaceutical industry. Dr. Vaidya currently works as a consultant helping companies and patient organizations advance new therapies for rare diseases. Previously, Dr. Vaidya was the vice president of clinical development at Travere Therapeutics, where he led clinical development for the company's metabolic and neurology pipeline, including an investigational therapy for HCU. After Dr. Vaidya left Travere, we realized that his expertise and extensive knowledge could help us, and thus he joined the board of HCU Network America in 2025. Sagar, thank you so much for being with us this evening. We're excited to learn with you, so we will now turn the time over to you.
Great. Thank you, Brittany, so much. And thank you, Danae. Great to hear your story. Let me bring up the slides and we'll get started. All right. So first of all, I just want to say I'm really honored to be here to talk to you, this audience about clinical trials, a topic which is, of course, near and dear to my heart. And also, I want to say it's such a privilege to be part of this wonderful organization. HCU Network America is just doing fantastic things for people with homocystinuria. And as Danae mentioned, there's a big change coming in the coming years. So we look forward to all of you guys participating with that progress. So let's get started with an audience question. And Brittany had brought up the Slido a little earlier, and we'd love to get some responses from you guys. So when you hear the term clinical trial or clinical research, what do you think of? See if we are able to get any answers here. I am not seeing the Slido results. I don't know, Danae or Brittany, if you guys are.
Um, Brittany, are you able to help?
Yes, I am. Sorry. I saw there was a chat too. So the app isn't taking, so just as a side note for tonight, the app does not do questions. If you have questions, you can add them to the chat in the Zoom. For the Slido, though, let's see. We have a couple answers. Hope is one of them. Complication. Got another person.
The person
So,
saying they can't respond.
okay, let me reshare the Slido. So if you just make sure you press open to add Slido to your Zoom. Well, you can see it now. Complication.
Mine's also not loading, so maybe you can read them for us, Brittany.
Yeah, so we have sorry. Complication, opportunity, and hope were
Okay,
the three
that's great.
responses we
That's
have so
great.
far. Yeah.
Well, hopefully, that is what we would like people to take forward from this webinar. So great to hear. And also, hopefully, after this presentation, you will understand a lot more and be more familiar and with some of the terms that come around clinical trials and when you think about participating. So let's start with the big umbrella of clinical research. So what is clinical research? Well, it's exactly that. It's an investigation for things that we still have not learned about yet. So whether it's a test, an experiment, a study, all of these things are important to help us improve the understanding of diseases, develop new treatments, and of course, ensure that those treatments are safe and effective. Now, when we talk about rare diseases, it's even more important that we focus on clinical research because, as you guys know, not a lot is understood about many rare diseases. Even many physicians are not even aware of them. Many of them have few or no treatments. And when we participate in research and have that research progress, those results really provide not only hope for the future for new treatments, but also gives patients an opportunity to really participate and drive that progress, have their voice heard, and ensure that their concerns are addressed by these new treatments and uh, devices or so. So when you think about clinical research, there are two things I would really love for you to take home from this presentation. One is that clinical research is absolutely dependent on participation of patients. That's because no matter how many doctors or scientists or labs that we have, even if we have a cure today, we will never be able to understand whether it works or how to use it without people participating. And so it's absolutely essential that people participate in order for our research to move forward. The second part is when research is done, any kind of research, once that's completed, those results are often communicated more broadly. They can be uh, uh, discussed at a scientific congress, for example, or sometimes they can be published, sometimes even make it to the mainstream media. And what this does is that really increases the awareness around the disease. And when more and more people are aware about it, more people are working on it, this leads folks to think maybe, hey, maybe these are new treatments. These are patients who actually do need this treatment, and this leads to investment in new therapies and treatments. So those who participate in research will be directly responsible for both the progress as well as this awareness investment in research. So let's talk about what types of clinical research there is, because there's quite a bit under this umbrella, and the different types of studies require different amounts of commitment. So we'll start on the left. Danae mentioned a natural history study or a non-interventional study, and that's something you can think of like when you take a survey, for example. And these studies are really important to help us understand more about the disease and create kind of, if you would think of like a baseline around the disease for understanding what happens in the future and if treatments are created, how might those treatments help us? So that's the first step. Then there are other studies that require biobanks or biomarkers. And this, for example, you may have heard of some studies where they donate a blood sample or look at your DNA, for example. And these are also very helpful in terms of helping us have actual cells from the patient in order to be able to do experiments. The third part, which is the focus of this uh, 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 presentation, is clinical trials or interventional or a new treatment. And so we'll talk a little bit more about those clinical trials. What is a clinical trial? Well, it's a study that has been developed to test a new treatment or a medicine or a device in people who have a particular condition. And it's important to know that participants have to volunteer for this. Um, and once these types of trials are absolutely required for any type of medicine to be approved and available more broadly to the population. So any medicine that we have taken, at least that has been approved in the last 50 years or so, has to go through this process of clinical trial. And that's important to ensure that what we're taking is safe and effective as described. Now, how does a clinical trial come about? So here it's kind of laid out in very simple steps. First, the scientists develop a treatment, and if that treatment looks good, it's tested quite extensively, usually in animals, and from there can move forward to being a human clinical trial. Their study is designed with doctors and the researchers and patients, hopefully, usually, and that has to be approved by various different regulatory groups. Once the trial is active, patients will enroll, and the treatment will be tested for the length of the trial. And finally, once the trial is completed, those results will be available. Now, a couple important things to note about clinical trials. So first is that clinical trials are very, very expensive. And so when a clinical trial does come about, you have to know that millions and millions of dollars have been put into testing this treatment already, and millions of dollars more will be put, hundreds of millions in the case of a phase 3 trial. And those people who are putting the money in, they're not stupid, right? They actually believe that this would be an effective therapy. They're very hopeful. The second is that clinical trials have a significant oversight. So it's not just anybody that can just go up and start a clinical trial. You really do need to provide quite a bit of evidence that your drug works and it's safe. This has to be reviewed and approved by the FDA. And then at every hospital or clinic where the clinical trial is running, will need to be approved by an ethics board, also known as IRB or Institutional Review Board. Now, who runs this clinical trial? Let's talk about a couple of the terms because there's quite a few people involved. You should know that every trial has a sponsor. Sometimes that's a company, sometimes it can be an association of universities, but they are the ones who really develop the trial and pay for the trial and have full oversight. Each trial is developed with a strict protocol or instructions that describe who can be enrolled and what the treatments are done. And this is very important because this really outlines each and every test. It outlines what type of people can be in the trial. Not everybody is going to be eligible for every trial, depending on what the trial is testing. And then finally, the doctors who participate, they're called the investigators. And oftentimes these trials will have many different clinic sites. For example, maybe all around the US or in a phase 3 study could be all around the world. And these investigators are often very experts in their field. They're often renowned and they have a lot of experience running clinical trials, which is why they're chosen to be part of that. Now let's talk a little bit about the phases of clinical trials. And you guys have probably heard phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. What does all that mean? Well, it's really a progression of testing of a particular treatment or medicine in larger and larger groups of people. So of course, when we start at the very beginning, we want to determine in phase 1, is this safe? So this is usually done in a very small group, usually healthy volunteers, and the treatment is given for a short period of time just to really understand, is it safe, and what might be the right dose to give in humans. Now, phase 2, that's where we really get to understand whether or not this treatment might work. It's a larger group of participants, usually people with the specific condition that is being tested. And this study generally can give us some more information about not only about the safety, but do we actually think the drug is working? Now, if a drug is able to be successful and has promising results in phase 2, and the company has enough money to take it forward, then it's moved forward to phase 3. And phase 3 are usually very large studies. As I said, they're very expensive. And this is the final step, really, to understand, are we sure that this drug works? Are we sure about the safety, about the dose, about the side effects? All of the things that we want to be confident about before the drug is available to the general public. And so that's a very critical step. If it works out well, often these drugs get approved by the FDA and they can move to phase 4. And you don't hear about phase 4 too often, but these are often done in larger groups of people, maybe sometimes looking for other conditions that a drug might be effective for, or looking at other aspects of the disease. Now, how are trials different in rare diseases? So there's some pretty significant differences that you should be aware of. First of all, of course, there's fewer people with the condition. So because of that, these trials are usually much smaller than the trials that you might see for other more common conditions, say, such as diabetes or heart disease. These trials are usually quite small, and oftentimes the trial stages can be combined. For example, phase one and phase two can be combined. And this is another reason for that is because the treatment often can't be given to healthy volunteers. These types of treatments often can't be given to healthy volunteers. Um, the other thing to understand is that these are often slowly progressing conditions. And because of that, it takes a long time to understand whether a treatment is working or not. So these trials can last many years in some examples. And finally, because it's a rare disease, because these are kind of the first time we are testing various aspects, the results may be more difficult to understand. And I know that does lead to a lot of frustration for various patient groups when they have trials and it's hard to really interpret that data to take the drug forward. But we do the best we can and we try to understand as much as we can about the disease and the treatment to move these treatments forward. So what might someone expect if they were in a clinical trial? So these are kind of the steps. First, they would come in for the screening. As I said, every trial has a specific rules about who can participate based on the testing that's done. So not everybody who wants to be in a trial will be eligible. For example, there may be certain tests that need to be done that a participant can't do. So, for example, they would not be eligible for that trial. If they meet all the eligibility and they want to proceed, then they move forward to enrollment. Subsequently, there will be study visits for the length of the trial. Everyone will be monitored very closely, and then at the end, once the trial is completed, the results will be analyzed. So let's take another quick break, and Brittany, you might have to help me on this one if I don't see the Slido. What is your biggest fear of participating in a clinical trial?
Hopefully you should see the word cloud pop up in the Slido app. Okay, we've got some answers here. Medical complications. If you can't for some reason use Slido, please feel free to add any comments to the chat. Risks is another one. So we've got a couple more people typing, Sagar.
Yeah, sure.
It's another one of risk. Yep. Looks like risk and medical complications are the biggest, the two answers that are coming up. How to maintain your current therapy.
Yeah, all great points. So let's address some of those and talk about what those concerns might be, and we'll get through most of those, and if not, we got the Q&A as well. So the first thing is to understand what kind of trial you're getting involved in. And the key piece of information for that is something called an informed consent form, also abbreviated as ICF sometimes. But the informed consent, this is the most important document that will be given to a participant at the very beginning. So if someone's interested in a trial, they talk to a doctor, and they're thinking about getting screened for that trial, the informed consent is the first most important document. Now, this document is supposed to explain all of the aspects of the trial, but in plain language, so that everyone can understand it, even without a medical background. So some of the things that will be in this document will be, for example, information on the treatment and why the researchers think that the treatment would be effective for the condition. They'll also review how is a trial designed, what are the tests or procedures that every participant would have to go through. And then, of course, it will also outline the potential risks. As you mentioned, people are one of concern is what might be the side effects. You're trying a new medicine. And so it will state there in the potential risks what might be those potential side effects to be experienced as well. And so it's really important this document will to take some time, understand it. If English is not your first language, you can ask for a translation. That's very, very important to make sure you understand it. And then, as much as companies try, sometimes their informed consents are still very confusing. And so, if you have questions, please ask them and make sure that you really understand what the trial is about before going further, deciding whether or not to participate. Who can sign this informed consent? Well, it depends on the who's participating, of course. If people who are over 18, they sign their own informed consent. Oftentimes, there will be pediatric studies, and in that case, it's a parent or legal guardian. And in many cases, there's also a simplified version of the consent for children, so that they also understand what they're getting into, and that's called an assent. So these would be the kind of the key documents that you'll be looking at before participating. Now, when we talk about safety, um, it's important to consider all of these aspects here. Now, we talk about side effects, and people are concerned about side effects, and of course that's a very valid concern because all trials and treatments come with some risk. All medicines in general have some side effects, but the hope is that the benefit that you get from these medicines far outweighs any potential side effects. And also, the drug is or treatment has usually been tested quite a bit before even the trial begins. And so you can see there's extensive safety testing that's usually done in animals, and then there may be several other trials where the drug may have been tested as well. So we get a good sense of what the potential side effects might be. But we don't know. Of course, that's why we're doing the trial to establish that safety and efficacy. And so everyone will be very closely monitored during the trial, both by the physician, also by lab tests, for example, and other types of tests. And if there's any concern at all, the treatment will be stopped. So there are rules within the protocol that ensure that patient safety comes first. And so again, any side effects, any serious side effects, treatment can be stopped at any time. Now, I want to take a couple minutes to talk about placebos and control groups because this is a question that comes up quite frequently as to what are they and why do they have them. And it's often very frustrating to participants in trials that there are these placebos or control groups because, of course, everybody would like to be in a trial to get treatment. But unfortunately, this is the way that we have to do these trials, and there's an important reason for that. So a placebo, as shown on the left, would be a fake treatment, essentially, something that's disguised to look like the actual treatment so that nobody can really tell them apart. Or sometimes there may be just a control group, which means that there is no treatment. And so these different groups are included in a clinical trial, and this helps us understand whether the new treatment really works. Many decades ago, people actually found out that when people enter a clinical trial, anybody, right, you start getting a lot of good care, and a lot of times people feel better, even if the treatment is not effective. And so that's called a placebo effect. And because of that reality, it's not very clear whether a drug works until you have a control group or a placebo group. So these are absolutely critical in order for people to accept the results of your trial, in order for the FDA, for example, to approve your trial, or for insurance companies in the future to pay for the medication. They really need to see a good, strong evidence that it's better than either a placebo or a control. Now, the good news is for those who get placebo in the trial, Oftentimes, the company has a second follow-up trial where all of the participants will be able to receive the treatment. That's called an open label study or expanded access program, for example. And I'll talk more about that on the next slide. So when you start thinking about these clinical trials, say potentially you read about one that you think is interesting, but there's all these words in there which are very hard to understand. So you got to learn a little bit of the vocabulary to understand how these trials are designed. So the first I talked about a little bit, placebo controlled, and that's where some of the participants receive treatment and some receive placebo. Usually it's about 50-50 or 1-to-1, and that's important to understand whether the medicine works. The second part is the randomization. The whether you get the treatment or the placebo is completely randomized. So no, it cannot be biased by the company or the doctor. It's done by a computer system, and that keeps us also ensuring that we're not somehow adjusting the study based on what we know about people. The next part is called double blind, and this means that neither the doctor or the participant knows whether they're getting treatment or placebo, for example, until the trial is over. So putting all these things together really gives us a system where we can clearly understand whether the drug works without anyone influencing, for example, a patient who's been put in a certain group or knows they're on treatment. The final one is called open label, so you can think of it as a bottle with a label on it, right? And it's open now. Everyone can see what it is, and that means that all participants receive the treatment. Now you have to know your rights as a trial participant, and those who are participating in trial have many, many rights. And the first thing to remember is that your participation is purely voluntary, and you can decide to quit the trial or research study at any time. And oftentimes, although we do obviously encourage people to try to stay in trials once they join, because it's difficult to analyze a trial where everyone drops out. But that being said, it's completely your choice. So for any reason, if you're having difficulties, any side effects, or other aspects that you don't like about it, you can discontinue at any time. There's no obligation. All trials are evaluated, as I mentioned. They have to be. They're legally required to be evaluated to ensure that their risks in this trial are minimized to you. There's no unnecessary tests. There's no unnecessary procedures. Really, everything there is the minimal of what we need to continue this trial. And then, of course, it's your medical history you're going to be getting in there, right? So you have that right to privacy and confidentiality. And again, both the doctor and the sponsor, everyone is legally required to make sure that they monitor the safety throughout the trial and they maintain your privacy and confidentiality. Yeah, what about the cost? How much does it cost to be in this trial? That's a frequent question that I get. So the good news is that these trials are generally free to participants who want to who participate. And even sometimes some trials may include a stipend, small stipend, since you will have to take time off to visit the clinic. But there's some, I think, really nice perks about being in a trial, which I've heard from many patients. The first is they have access to very high quality medical attention. So as I said before, a lot of our investigators are really really well known in their field, and if someone has a rare condition, maybe their local physicians don't understand it as well. But in a trial, you'll get access to doctors and staff that really understand the condition, have seen a lot of patients, and you'll be seeing them many times, much more frequent than you would see a regular doctor. So that can be one of the positives. In addition, many sponsors can pay for travel to the site as well as meal accommodations, all meant to make it easier for people to participate. That being said, of course, caregiver and family support is really important. These trials do take a lot of time. They take a lot of effort for everyone involved. So the more support that you can have for that, definitely the better. Now let's talk about some myths and facts about clinical trials. So this is pretty interesting here. Oftentimes, people think that clinical trials are a last resort. They think about someone who has a very advanced cancer, and this is the only thing that's left for them. But that's actually a myth. Many people join trials because they want access to therapies that they think are potentially very promising. A lot of times, people also join because they want to help progress research for their community or for their condition. Um, Second myth is that participants are treated like laboratory test subjects. So as I was saying on the last slide, it's anything but that. Participants are treated very well. They have rights, protections, they get specialized medical care, again, in addition to paying for all the costs of the trial, procedures, etc. And they may not be getting that at their primary physician. Finally, people think, oh, well, I don't know if I want to join. Once I join, what if I don't like it? I can't leave. Well, that's just simply not true. Uh, you can withdraw at any time for any reason, or even for no reason, if you do not want to be in the trial. Although I would recommend or encourage you that if you really do take the step to be in the trial, you try to see it out to the end because that's how we get more information about the disease is by analyzing all this information. So there's a lot of things to consider before you join a clinical trial. Um, Definitely participating in clinical research is helpful for those who maybe are not ready for a trial. Maybe some kind of a natural history study, or maybe a biomarker study might be more appropriate as a starting point. But for those who are willing to jump in and really want to help us take the next step to making new treatments, we really need your help in participating in these trials. So things to think about is, I'd say number one is time commitment, because of course we're all busy, everyone's got things to do. So carving out that time to make it to the study visits is not easy for everyone. Getting to know what are those tests and procedures, are those things that you'd be willing to do, for example. How far away is the travel to the trial site, and how many visits are there? Sometimes can you do visits remotely? That's also very helpful. And this kind of gets back to the time as well, understanding the participation. Now, let's say all of those things are okay. Now, you're really thinking about, what about the treatment? What is the potential safety risks? Understanding that all all trials, all treatments have some risks. Do the potential benefits of the treatment, would they outweigh the safety risks, right? And how might they benefit me, or how might the results benefit my community? Um, all important thoughts, all very personal decisions to each person, figuring out if they want to participate, and if they do, how to plan their life around that, and get it into their schedule. And it's not easy for anyone involved, for sure, but with determination, I think a lot of good things come out of it. So I'm hoping I've convinced you a little bit that clinical trials can be beneficial. Now, how might you find a clinical trial if you're interested in participating? Well, the first is to talk to your care team, whether that be your primary care physician or potentially your geneticist or other specialists who may have more information about that. You can also search it up on the internet. There's lots of different websites. Clinicaltrials.gov is one, um, but there are others as well. And finally, patient advocacy organizations such as HCU Network America, of course, will be communicating about open trials. That's one of their missions, is to ensure that the community is aware of all the progress that's going on, and so I'm sure you'll be seeing lots of call outs from them about trials that are coming up that you may be interested in, and I encourage you to learn more. Now, the patient community is critical to all of this, and this is just this slide just kind of shows an example of some of the activities that organizations help out with, particularly HCUNA. I know working on patient registries and natural history studies, collaborations with researchers from other organizations, and providing funding for particular types of research that are directly going to benefit patients. And in general, I think raising awareness because these conditions are rare, because most people are not aware of them. It's so critical to keep, sounding the horn and shouting from the rooftops until people start taking notice. And that's when you start seeing momentum building. And I've seen that in a lot of conditions where there have been approved drugs, and it's amazing how everything just really opens up. But it requires everybody to kind of hold hands and move forward together. RareX, I think, is a great example of a collaboration that HCUNA has to build a patient registry of folks with homocystinuria and start collecting information so that we can understand more about the condition. So that's just one example. So here we are at the end of the presentation. I've got some key takeaways for you. Hope you appreciate the pun. So the first is just basic definition of clinical trials. They're studies to look at potentially new treatments, and they exist because of unmet need. And particularly in rare diseases, there's a huge unmet need, and therefore, participation in these trials is really critical. When people do participate, that leads to a lot of positives. First of all, of course, the trial couldn't proceed without participants. But in addition, any type of research will eventually increase awareness, increase investment in that particular condition, and in general drive progress. And so that is just a key nature of this process that's important to understand. And if we want to see progress for in the condition, then we really do need to find ways to participate more more strongly. And then finally, patients are partners; they're not subjects. It's not as if you're going to be some kind of a lab test subject. If anything, I think the participants get excellent care when they're in the trial, and so that's just something else to think about. But participation is always your choice. At any time, you can withdraw your participation. It's completely voluntary. Um, so. I hope covered a lot of information there. I really hope it was helpful. I want to thank HU Network America again for inviting me here to talk about this, and particularly shout out to Brittany for making such a fun presentation and getting the Slido together, the questions. So it's the first time we're trying Slido with the group here. So that's the end, and thank you again for your attention, and I'll stop sharing and take questions now.
Thank you, Sagar. So, like you said, we'll move into the Q&A now. Anyone is welcome to enter their questions into the Q&A. You can also enter them to the chat, but it's easier to see them all kind of lined up here. And so there's a couple of questions I'm going to combine into one, and it has to do with clinical trial sites. And so one of the questions was, can clinical trials be open to Canadian residents that are being offered? And if you don't live near a study site, are there ways, are they able to do everything remotely, screening, blood test? The patient shares where they live, and they mentioned Science 37, which obviously we know is one of the decentralized trial sites. So would you mind talking about decentralized trials and what happens if a patient doesn't live within, for our sake, it's the US?
Cool. Yeah. So let me address the first question about Canada first. So the answer to that, so it depends on whether or not the trial is being run in that country. And so that's a decision usually made by the sponsor. And a lot of thought kind of goes into that. Remember, these trials are very expensive to run. So companies don't have the money to necessarily run them everywhere. And so they may have to kind of pick and choose certain countries. And certain people in other countries won't be eligible to participate in them until, say, a future trial or the drug is approved. Now, decentralized trials is a new concept, relatively new concept that has come about, especially with the change to all of the virtual working. Uh, there have been some companies that have been able to engineer ways to participate in a clinical trial from home. So instead of going to an office or a clinic, a nurse will come to your house and you will do, say, a video call with the doctor, and they will do some blood tests and et cetera there. That is available for some trials, but not all trials. So you'll have to check with the trial itself and find out if that's available or not. Generally, most trials, I would say, have some visits that you will have to be in the hospital, or sorry, in the clinic. But in addition, the companies usually try to minimize the number of visits. We try to have as few visits as possible. Again, this goes to minimizing risk, right? Minimizing any kind of unnecessary burden to participants. And so hopefully the study won't, whichever study you have, shouldn't have too many on-site visits.
Thank you. And then we have another one here. Even though we don't know if we're receiving the drug or placebo, will we know what our blood results are during the trial, or will we have to, or will we only know after the study is over? And I have another question after that. So
Okay,
I'll let
sure.
you answer that.
So it really depends again on the trial, and usually the trials are very specific about what is allowed and what's not allowed. So sometimes there are tests that you can do that would unblind you, right? So for example, likely the example you're talking about is with classical homocystinuria. For example, you can check your homocysteine level, and if it's much lower, potentially know if you're unblinded or not. So that is definitely not allowed, and that could potentially jeopardize the study itself. So things like that, which would lead to unblinding, absolutely are not allowed. However, seeing your regular doctor, continuing your regular treatments, having your general regular blood test, all of that you should be able to be continued.
That was actually my next question there. Um, We have another one here. Do I learn about all the study details during the screening and enrollment process, like the risk, medical visits, dosing and frequency? Or when would you learn about those study details?
No, so you would learn all of those things right around the time of screening. So generally, I think you would, if you're interested, you would have a conversation with either a study coordinator or the physician or one of the nurses that's running the study, and just to understand, what is the study about? Is it interesting to me? They will also probably have a few questions for you to try to understand whether or not you might be able to participate based on, your specific situation and whether you'd be eligible or not. And at that point, you get that informed consent form I was talking about. And that's where it's critical to read that, ask all your questions. All of that occurs during the screening time. Now, only if you feel comfortable, after having read everything, having understood everything, you feel comfortable, should you sign that informed consent. And if you go through those procedures and you find you are eligible for the trial, right, then you can be enrolled. So it really requires quite a bit of effort from all sides to make sure that patients enrolled. And a lot of times people really want to participate, and they find that they're not eligible, and that can be very frustrating. for these trials because people want to get the treatment or they want to participate. They want to help push this forward. Just understand that the trials are created this way for a reason. And if we don't specify the types of people, the specific type of people who can participate, then the results of the trial won't be very meaningful. So that's why they're so strict about the eligibility. But all of the information would be available to you before you actually enroll the study.
I want to jump ahead to two questions ahead, just because I think this kind of goes hand in hand. The question here is, can I share the study details with my doctor to get input? I think this is a really great question, leading off of your last one.
Mhm. Yes, absolutely. You absolutely can and should share information, particularly when you're at the beginning of the study in the screening period, and you're thinking about, is this a study I really want to be a part of? Do I have the time to commit to it? What might be the risks involved? And there may be some complicated decisions that you need some additional help with. So I would definitely reach out to your primary care physician or someone you trust, and get help about that decision. Now, once you're in the trial, many of the aspects of the trial are confidential, so you can't necessarily tell them all the details about the trial and what's going on, but definitely keeping them informed. And if there are any side effects, for example, oftentimes the investigator of the trial will talk to the primary care physician to really understand, is this a side effect from the drug, or is this just something random that happened?
Like, you're reading my mind here, Sagar. So the next question is, I don't know if there is an answer to this, but how long is a safe amount of time to let pass to know if you will get side effects from a study or from a drug?
Ooh, that's a tough one. I would say most side effects for most drugs occur pretty quickly, within days to weeks. And so you would generally know, within the trial period. Um, some drugs, sometimes you don't get side effects until you've been taking them for years. Those are much more rare. And I'd say, here, these drugs are tested in animals for long periods of time. So we kind of have a sense of whether those long-term side effects might be. The nice thing I would say, though, about some of the newer drugs and treatments that we have, particularly drugs that we call biologics, drugs that are essentially they're biological in nature. They're created from molecules that are already within us. And so these drugs, because they're very similar to, uh, you know, molecules that are inside of us, they really are very specific to what they're supposed to do, and they don't have a lot of side effects, or like I should say, um, unpredictable side effects. Whereas if you take a pill, right, that's a chemical, maybe it does something, but maybe it goes somewhere else in your body and it causes some other side effects. So it's a little bit harder to know. But with the biologics, we usually know pretty quickly what the side effect profile would be.
Wonderful. Thank you. I have one question off of that, and it is, it was mentioned that participants are monitored for safety during the trial. So speaking of rest,
Yeah.
but what happens if I do experience side effects? Who should I report that to?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's something that you'd want to report to the study coordinator, back to the study coordinator. If it's something that's a significant side effect, you got to let them know very quickly. And when you sign up for the trial, they'll give you the information. They'll give you the phone number to call if you have side effects, etc., like that. If it's something minor, maybe for example, you have a backache or something, you're not sure whether it's related. That's something that you would bring up at the next study visit and say, okay, well, I had a backache, and could that be a side effect of the medication? So there'll be plenty of opportunity to report those side effects. As I said, all medications, all treatments have some level of side effects. And the goal of these trials is really to understand, are the side effects, are they mild? What are they? How can we prevent them? And then is the benefit greater than the side effects? Generally, what I would say is that if there's really any concern about a major side effect that could affect patients' safety, the treatment will not be advanced further in therapies. So, because again, they're very expensive. Remember, these trials are very, very expensive. So nobody wants to put that money on a treatment that might potentially be unsafe for patients. So generally, the ones that are advanced, particularly to phase three, there's been a lot of extensive testing and we have a pretty good idea of what the side effects might be.
Wonderful. I have one last question here for you, and then Brittany will wrap up for us. Um, could participation in a trial exclude me from participating in future trials?
Yeah, no, great question. So the simple answer to that is no. Generally, when you take treatments, once you stop that treatment, the drug or the treatment kind of washes out of your body and you would be allowed to be in another trial. So there might be a waiting period. If you say you did one trial and you want to be in another trial, there might be a waiting period between those trials. But generally, I would say you would be able to be in another trial. Now, the one caveat to that though is if you've done a trial where they have a long-lasting treatment, things like gene therapy, for example, if you've done a gene therapy trial, the effects of that treatment are still being kind of determined, and so you probably couldn't be in another trial because they wouldn't know whether the effects would be due to the new medicine or the old medicine. But in general, I would say in general, most trials you would be eligible for a future trial.
Thank you so much, Sagar.
Yeah,
Brittany,
this
we're
has
going
been
to hand
great.
it off to you now.
Great. Just want to thank everyone and again for coming. Thank you, Sagar and Danae. Thank you to everyone who's joined us tonight. You've brought your time, your questions, and your commitment to advancing our understanding in clinical trials. We also want to recognize the collaboration behind the series. Thank you to our sponsor, Travere, for making this presentation possible. We hope you'll join us for the next webinar of this series on clinical trials, which takes place on April 18th, 4 p.m. Eastern Time. You'll find the link to register on our Facebook page or our website, where you will hear from Dr. Baker, who is an investigator for Travere's global clinical trial for pegtibatinase. It's a potential treatment for classical homocystinuria. So from our HCU data collection program to clinical trials, new therapies start with you. Have a wonderful evening, and thank you again for being here.